Well, Jessica, I've looked forward to having a post-Doom conversation with you for probably close to a year now. Ever since you asked a couple of really wonderful questions in my conversation with Jem Bendell, I think it was like about a year ago. And so, welcome to this series. And what I like to do at the start is just help us, help anybody who's watching or listening to this to have some sense of who you are and sort of where you're from.
Okay, great. Thank you for the invitation, Michael. I've long admired the Postdoom series. You've had an amazing array of people on, and thank you. I'm happy to be part of it now. I am based in the small Eastern Caribbean island of Dominica, and most people get it mixed up with the Dominican Republic, which it is not. It is the English-speaking island between Guadeloupe and Martinique. And here on a 3-acre property, we're 1,500 feet up in the mountains, right before the World Heritage Site, which is the rainforest in Dominica. And we have a retreat center, small center where we welcome people from all over the world, groups, students. We host wellness groups, and it's basically been a kind of a labor of love over the last 20 years. And we like to think of ourselves kind of as a watering hole where people can come to rejuvenate, to reconnect with themselves, with nature, with one another. And it's kind of unfolded very organically. We also have a production company, and originally we did productions for international shows from all over the world, from the Caribbean. And I'm also a member of the Deep Adaptation Forum, which we can talk a little bit about later. And I'm very involved in my community here in Dominica, on the farmers group. We have a farmers collective, working with the village council. And we also have a tourism association and wellness association. So there's a lot, I wear a lot of hats and things. I grew up in the suburbs in London, Ontario, and this is a big shift from that.
And you've been there 20 years, you say?
And over 25 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I've grown up in the global north. I live in the global south. So I'm kind of an in-between person and trying to take the best from both worlds, and especially in these times.
That's great. And you mentioned we, is that you and your partner, your spouse?
Yes, and so my life partner, Tim Fishleigh, we've been on this journey together for 30 years and collaborating on lots of different interesting projects.
That's great. Well, I've been using language of pre-doom, doom, and post-doom as far as this series. And I'm just curious, does that language, like what of that language, if any, works for you? And then how would you describe your own relationship to the predicament of our times? I'll ask you more in terms of your story, how you've come to this understanding, but just in terms of the language, how do you language it for yourself?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with post-doom, and words like doom and collapse. I come from a media background, so I know that if you are in the doomosphere, if you are collapse aware, those words really make sense and really sort of anchor you, and that's the conversation we're going to have. But if you aren't a collapse aware person, I think they can be triggering words.
I agree.
And I especially feel like people, there's a fight and flight response that happens when people get triggered by
Yes.
words that are scary or
Yes.
unfamiliar. And it does tend to close people off, I think, who haven't had that time to sort of immerse themselves in the understanding of our predicament. So I would say for the collapse aware community, wonderful, fantastic. I think for people who are not yet there, who are on a different journey, perhaps, I think that it can be a turnoff and kind of a detriment to opening the conversation.
Yeah.
But I think that's changing very quickly as we see what's happening.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Just in the last 3 years, and especially even just this year, it's like people for whom collapse was like, okay, yeah, whatever. They're far more interested in like, okay, talk to me about collapse now again, or talk to me about, our predicament. And, it's almost as if people for whom they still have some holding out for sort of perpetual progress or sort of, things getting back to normal or whatever, are beginning to question some of that. And there's a receptivity. What I'm finding, there's a receptivity. Just like yesterday, I mean, Elliot Jacobson was on CNN here in the United States just yesterday, and that wouldn't have happened a year ago, or maybe even 6 months ago. Well, okay. So Jessica, share a little bit about how you came, how you grew up, what was your worldview in terms of your understanding of the trajectory of things, or just the nature of our times, or the nature of the world. And then how did you come to your current both understanding but also experience, both professionally and your engagement and respected leadership within the deep adaptation community?
Okay, well, as I mentioned, I grew up in Southern Ontario, a loving family, grew up in the industrial north. So but at the same time, I always had this feeling of things were not quite right. I mean, cities just seemed quite unsustainable to me as a young person. And I went to the University of Toronto, one of the largest, most multicultural cities in the world. Fantastic culturally, amazing opportunities. But at the same time, there's this creeping feeling of how can this all be sustained, over
what year was this?
And in the early 90s,
Early 90s,
91,
okay.
92. Yeah. So and right around the Rio Earth Summit, and then there was this hopeful moment, the Earth Summit was there,
Right,
the whole world came together, beginning of the climate summits, thinking, okay, we're really going to deal with this. We're really going to change our ways from being totally unsustainable to being more ecocentric. And of course, we know what happened. So with each COP, we're now at COP 27, 28 this November. Just the trajectory just kept going in the wrong direction. So although there's this background worry, I'm living my life, I'm going to university, I'm discovering the world, and but I was always drawn back somehow to this sort of natural place, and I ended up coming back to my ancestral home in Dominica. And this is, where I've been for the last almost 30 years. And that was it was a very conscious decision, wanting to be closer to nature, to live in nature, yes, to live closer to this incredible biodiversity that we have around us, and to create, to have a more creative life. I felt it's, to be able to do more things, like gardening, building your own house, having less rules and more creative freedom. So it wasn't until probably the big wake-up call for me personally was 2017, Hurricane Maria, that just devastated this island. We were on the front page of every newspaper for a couple of weeks. Now that wouldn't happen. There are many disasters going on all over the place. We're no longer on the front, just the only ones on the front line. There's so many communities that are on the front lines of the climate crisis. But that to me was a huge lesson in sort of a trial run for collapse. What does collapse look like? What does it do to communities? When you have no agriculture, when most of the buildings have been destroyed, roofs off, no bridges, no infrastructure. Yes. Nothing's coming in regularly. So everything that is turned upside down, and you really have to start from the beginning. And what are the basics? So it was a huge lesson in how do we survive? What are the most important things in a community when industrial civilization kind of is no longer, goes away? And that taught me a lot of things about resilience and about community and the importance of mutual aid networks and all these kinds of things. And so then when I read Jem's paper in 2018, the deep adaptation paper, it was, pulling all these strands together and really looking at societal collapse is really very, for the industrial north, is very likely and may have already become, something underway. Right. So I joined the Deep Adaptation Forum about 2020, in lockdown. And of course, everybody was sort of in this state of, okay, this is, things are getting real. And so that was kind of my journey. And finding Deep Adaptation a really powerful online self-organizing community to really hold a lot of these questions and conversations and to share practices. So.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's great. I've shared on some, I think maybe two or three previous post-Doom conversations, the central role that Jem's paper had in sort of this whole post-Doom world and post-Doom conversation series in itself. So yeah. And I regularly find that your name comes up when I'm in communication with people in that context because of the role and roles that you've played there. So I want to invite you, Jessica, to share some of your own community and your own experience there on the island because it's so unique. When I read the article that you had written 6 or 7 or 8 months ago on 4 lessons for the world from Dominica on your 44th independence anniversary, I was struck in the reading of that, but I also know that you've got some really great visuals. So I'm going to make you co-host and invite you to screen share so you can just walk us through your experience there and your images.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you, Michael. I find it's a more effective way as well to sort of ground people in where I am because it is very unique and it's a unique island in the Caribbean. Because we still have an intact oceanic rainforest, which is rare in the entire world, in fact. So what you're looking at here is my village of Cochrane. And you can see mountains and valleys, and that's what Dominica is. It's just we're more mountainous than Switzerland per square kilometer, actually.
Wow.
And it's an agrarian community. This is my property, Caapi Cottage Retreats, in the rainforest. This was Hurricane Maria. That's the footprint over the island. And the devastation here it was really complete.
Oh
Okay,
my
that's
gosh.
our
Yeah.
village the day after.
Oh,
So every leaf on every tree gone, but there's our neighbor up fixing a roof. And that's what happened right after the hurricane. Everybody came together. We started putting roofs back. We checking on people, making sure people were safe. So we're subsistence farming. This is most people have backyard gardens who aren't full-time farmers. We host groups. This is Clemson University coming down and doing volunteer work. We do a lot of community support work as well, and a lot of workshops on looking at better ways, healthier ways to produce food and to do a lot of value-added things. This is the farm group workshop that you're looking at. One of the things in the paper I was writing about was this mutual aid tradition, and we call it coup de main, which in the Creole language here means lend a hand. And in places you find this community self-help very common in places where there isn't a lot of money, indigenous communities, slave societies, we're post-colonial society, and people just know they have to help each other. And we have to work together to do things that need to get done.
yes,
And
of
without
course.
money, you know? So that's been a tradition, and it's kind of the social glue that keeps communities together. And it's one of the things that's really been devastated in the industrial North, you know, by consumerism, by that kind of the structure of keeping people in sort of nuclear family units. So here, extended family is extremely important. Community support. People have a lot of different skills, okay, because we need to do things for ourselves. So carpentry, stonemasonry, plumbing, electrical, all of these skills you can find in one village. You know, we all have to learn to be able to be quite self-sufficient. These images are groups that we've had on the property. We host local students. A lot of our focus is on youth and giving young people safe spaces to learn and to grow, to develop the skills that they're going to need, you know, going forward and to meet the challenges ahead. And so that's very satisfying. And that's, I have an 18-year-old daughter, so very connected to that generation as well.
Oh yeah.
When people come down and learn about gardening in the Caribbean and farming, it's just so different than in North America. And so it's really exciting to see that sort of eye-opening other ways of living and being.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. So yeah, this was a deep adaptation gathering. Actually, it's a deep life gathering that you're looking at right now, where we came together to talk about, well, what are some of the responses that we can hold and develop as a community going into this era of collapse. This is one of many waterfalls,
Mm,
and
mm.
the Tito Gorge. And another key element that we have on the property, we do plant medicine workshops because we believe in mystical experiences and opening, how the potential to open people up to new ways of thinking, to raising our consciousness. And the plants have a lot to teach us.
Yes.
And being with them, learning from them, understanding that plants for thousands of years have been part of healing for human beings.
Yes.
Yeah, and this is just an exterior of Scott's Head. Scott's Head in the very southern tip of the island. Okay, I'll stop sharing now.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Wow. And wow. So, one of the things that I thought of as I was watching that, and I'm so glad I've never done this actually in any of the Postdooms. Nobody had a sort of a set of slides that were moving without sound that they could then talk over. That's just absolutely brilliant. But one of the things that did occur to me is I think things are going to spiral down or spiral out, or whatever the metaphor, but things get worse and get actually unsurvivably worse for many people in many parts of the world. And so I thought, wow, Dominica is likely to last a lot longer than a lot of other places, I think. So that's awesome. Well, Jessica, I'm curious, how do you, even just in the last, say, 5 years or 6 years, how have you come to see the speed at which things are unwinding and what is possible? Like I'm curious, one of the questions that I've often asked in this series is, your sense of what are the opportunities that still remain, like what's no longer possible realistically, and then what still is possible. And because sometimes people mistakenly hear my message and think, well, he's just saying that, we can't do anything, it's all doom. Well, no, post doom is precisely not that. It's saying that, yes, there are some things that are not possible any longer, if they were even possible in the first place. But there's a tremendous amount of things, there are a tremendous number of things that are completely possible. And in fact, deeply soul nourishing and community enriching to do them. So I'm curious, what's your sense of what's still possible and what's really no longer possible as you purvey things now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really, really super important, because a lot of the labeling that goes on from the mainstream about people who are collapse aware, that we're doomers, that we've given up, that we're just going to sit on our couch and watch Netflix and chill and that kind of thing. And I find in certainly in the Deep Adaptation Network, so many people who are collapse aware there are some of the most joyful people, some of the most active in their communities.
Exactly.
Starting new projects, having sort of this rejuvenation actually, because we are no longer believe in the myths and the lies about it, eternal growth and industrial civilization continuing. So that leaves a lot of open space and a lot of creativity and a lot of ability to come together and reimagine things for our own communities and in our own families. So I think that there's everything is possible, on the scale, of where you live.
Yes,
I
yes,
think
I'm
that
glad you mentioned that.
yeah, it's really a scale thing. I think when we were thinking big and we're thinking we can change the world and we can come together and make these global changes, I don't believe that. I think that it's been shown that that's not possible. But what is possible is what where you're at and what you can do within your family and your community. And a lot of that is really exciting. And I think that we have one of the things that came out of the devastation of Maria was an artist collective. There was an explosion of art after this disaster,
Wow.
And it was really something that kind of, you know, the human spirit and creativity
Yes.
rises to the top after you
Yes.
get slammed down and realize what we have left is just our own expression, you know. And this is one of the things that gives me the most, fills me with a lot of joy and hope for the next generation, is they are creative, and they're coming together and recognizing they have this creative power. And it brings joy, and it brings rejuvenation, and it actually strengthens, and it's part of resilience. I think art and creativity are a key part of resilience and of moving through difficult
Oh, I
times.
completely agree.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so we work with them. We work with health and wellness communities. We really, we're actually working on a festival right now. I think festivals and celebrations are really key. Um, and we do a lot, of course, with the land, um, with gardens and growing things. And I mean, on our property, we have probably 45 different types of fruit trees, everything from cocoa, coffee, you know, orange, apricot, avocado, banana, you know, just on and on, all the citrus. Um, and, you know, to me, it's kind of, I would be doing this anyway, even if things were
Right.
not, you know,
Right.
in this state. And I think it's sort of, when you are able to sort of not believe in those kinds of promises of the industrial world, you think, oh, okay, well, let's get back to what, you know, what human beings were doing, how we were sustaining ourselves before industrial civilization. And what are the practices that our ancestors were doing that were so healthy and so regenerative.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. Just yesterday or day before yesterday, I think Connie was talking about sort of my role and, you know, what we're doing and her role and stuff. And she said something in a kind of humorous way. She said, "Yeah," she said, "your role isn't to convert people or to convince people or to, you know, make sure that they become collapse aware. It's like, okay, collapse accepting is not the same thing as collapse aware, but you're not even playing an evangelistic role in terms of getting people to collapse acceptance or getting people to collapse awareness. You're kind of like there for people who no longer, however they get there, they can no longer believe in Santa Claus. They can no longer believe that industrial civilization is what we were, you know, made out to be, you know, or the Wizard of Oz or whatever metaphor you want to use. But that, and then are left with, okay, how do I still have healthy relationships? How do I nurture a deeper, more intimate relationship with the land? How do I have a lot of joy in my life, even in the midst of unstoppable contraction that could get pretty severe and already is severe for many people in many parts of the world. Um, and so I'm I'm struck with the wealth of natural abundance that what I would call godly, earth, you know, the sort of divine land, the fecundity of the species that you have that is going to, in many ways, especially given the importance placed on care of the land, working with the land and with other species, that, you know, as you used the word earlier in this conversation, an ecocentric rather than a anthropocentric or human centered, or even in some cases androcentric, man centered understanding of things that so much of the world, the industrial world, has had. And so I want to come to a few things that you had mentioned in your essay, that you could just share a little bit more about, because I think they're really important. One is related to what you call mutual care networks. Say something about that.
Yes, well, I mentioned coup de main, which is the tradition
Yes.
of lend a hand and self-help, a community self-help. So we live in a very small agricultural community. There's about 400 residents, and I would say everybody does a lot, you know, serious amount of their days doing volunteer work and care work, that's unpaid. You know, it's
Yes.
a non-informal economy. So it's when COVID hit, for an example, we immediately formed actually a WhatsApp group for the entire village. So everybody was on WhatsApp, and the nurse was disseminating health information
Wow.
to everybody. We had meetings, you know, community meetings online where we could talk about people's concerns and issues. And we also came together, the farmers group and people in the community, to distribute food that was grown in the community to every household where people couldn't leave their house for health reasons, or so just making sure that everybody was really well taken care of. We also started a psychosocial support network, a broader network of therapists and teachers and people that we could identify anyone who's in trouble, with whether it's children or elderly, and be able to support them. So there's this kind of web, it's like a social glue that's over everything.
Yeah.
And we immediately, during a disaster, after disaster, people step up and find a role, and what's mine to do. And most people know what theirs is to do because they use their skills and their services and offer that. So that's something that's kind of intuitive, in these kinds of communities where there hasn't been a huge amount of support from outside,
Right.
To fix roads and things. We do have crews when we need to get roads fixed, or sometimes we have to do it ourselves if there's no money, government support to do that. So that's kind of something that I really have a huge amount of respect for. And I didn't grow up with that, but I see how that is really going to play a key role, as more systems collapse and as we don't have the outside world to depend on as much.
Yes, exactly.
I wanted to talk about the idea of sanctuary.
Oh, yes. You mentioned that in your email.
Yeah, there was a recent post. One of the things I love about the Deep Adaptation Facebook page is the conversations that come up. And they're moderated, so it's really nice that they're always healthy and generative conversations. But one person posted a question: has anyone, as part of their deep adaptation process, started becoming, being, or building sanctuary? And this could be for other humans or for the more than human world, perhaps a network of sanctuary. And she called it Islands of Sanity, cultivating beauty, celebrating wilderness and sacredness of life, and being in harmony. And immediately that resonated with me, because I really feel that that's what we're doing here on the land, is being a sanctuary. We plant pollinator gardens, and we make sure that there's lots for the hummingbirds and the bees and that kind of thing. And then I went to the dictionary definition of sanctuary because I wanted to sort of dig in a bit more. And originally, sanctuaries were natural locations where the divine or the sacred was believed to be especially present. And it's, of course, a refuge, a safe place, a nature preserve. And I think when you ask about, well, what can we do now in these times? I think that that's key, to be a sanctuary, to find out ways that you can, for another person, whether it's giving them a place to stay, for rejuvenating the soils and bringing back, regenerating a place that's been devastated, or in your family, be a sanctuary emotionally for people. And I think that's something that's exciting because there's this need for it, and it's coming out of a place of sort of our natural human inclination, to care for one another.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, that leads into the other thing that I wanted you to share about, which is sort of your own there in your home and what you do in terms of offering groups, retreat, and that sort of thing. Share anything you'd like about what you and your life partner are doing in that regard.
Sure. Well, it comes from a place when I was in my 20s. I mean, I love group work. I think that that's amazing things can happen when people come together in groups. And I was a camp counselor, and I met my partner in southern India. Actually, we were working for Canada World Youth, and we took Canadians to India, and they partnered with young Indians for 6 months and lived and worked together on projects and in host families. And so the vision for us, because we came out of that non-formal education tradition, was to create something somewhere in the world, where we could host educational programs. And we had a roundabout kind of way to get there, because we first came down and we were doing video production and all kinds of other things and didn't have property or anything for years and years. So now it's nice to see it's kind of a full circle where we work with international university groups who come here on retreat to do field work for their fields of study or for volunteer work. And we also work with local groups, giving them space to have retreats and workshops, and naturalist groups. We've got a number lined up this winter now that everybody's traveling again. There's a big demand for groups to come down. And for Dominica, because it's so unique, we do get a lot of people that are interested in our resident sperm whales, in the rainforest. The biodiversity here is really incredible. And so that's a big draw, and the hikes, the trails as well.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea of contrast, Antigua, an island, just 2 islands north of us, they have a beach for every day, hundreds of beaches, and no fresh water. And Dominica, we say we have a river for every day.
Oh.
We have hundreds of rivers. And I actually have a 60-foot waterfall on the edge of my property.
God.
Which is not uncommon in Dominica. And we're still discovering more waterfalls all the time. So just the contrast in the Caribbean between,
yes,
it's very dramatic. We're not all the same.
Yeah, well, and one is far more sustainable for mammals in terms that need fresh water for sure. Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, Jessica, anything else that you'd like to say to be complete in this sort of post-doom, no gloom conversation?
Yeah. Well, I would say that, we have to be vigilant. I mean, we can't take for granted what we have. Dominica is this lush and natural really by default, because we were very difficult to develop when the other islands were being clear cut for, sugar cane and then for other cash crops. It was just too expensive to do that here because of all the mountains. And so when mass tourism was coming in the 60s and 70s in these other islands and building massive hotels and resorts all over the place, Dominica was ignored. And we didn't have the white sand beaches and the gold sand. We have black sand volcanic beaches and rocky cliffs and coral reefs. And we're one of the best dive sites in the Caribbean because we're mountains on top and mountains down below. But things are changing, and there's a lot of pressure for us to go the same route. And so we have to recognize what we have and not take it for granted, and be stewards of the land. So there's what I'd like to do, is to really give the next generation, not just to leave them the land better than I found it, but to instill in them this love for the island, and that the land will provide if we take care of it, and if we do the right thing and follow the example of the natural world and how the plants want to be, and how the plants are teachers, really.
Amen. Well, speaking of teachers in the next generation, I seem to recall from somewhere hearing that your daughter was thinking of or going to be going off to university. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, she's going to University of British Columbia. And she's excited about that, but also she's taking young people through canoe trips in northern Canada through the wilderness.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
A canoe guide, and she's, of course, loves the natural world and loves Dominica, and I think that will always be part of her. Yeah. And even if she's in the north for a while, and yeah.
Has she had to deal with much of the wildfires and wildfire smoke up there this summer?
Yes, quite a bit, because as you know, Canada's had record wildfire season this year, with like over 1,000 fires right across the country. So air quality has been a massive issue. Of course, I mean, to think about all the animals and all the plants.
I know. It's just, I mean, just this morning, we're in Ypsilanti. Connie and I are in Ypsilanti, Michigan, sort of between Ann Arbor and Detroit, southeast Michigan. And at 3:00 last night, in the middle of the night, we had the windows open up, and Connie's like, "It doesn't smell good. It smells," and so I closed things down, and sure enough, the air quality index was quite poor today. So it's like, okay, we're, nobody is immune to the challenges that we're all dealing with in terms of the collapse of the biosphere or the collapse of industrial civilization.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I reflect on when you ask, okay, well, what are sort of the ways that we can better prepare or equip ourselves for that? Peter Russell made this comment about taking nature's example, like being trees in a forest, so how do trees in the forest survive? Well, they have deep roots that are intertwined and connected to one another. These are the things that we need to be very well connected to people in our community. Extensive communication systems, they bend in the wind and the weather, and they co-regulate one another and host a variety of species that form mutually beneficial relationships.
Yes,
So
yes,
if we could
beautiful.
be that,
Yes, no,
our
exactly.
communities, trees in the forest,
Yeah.
then we might stand a chance of not just weathering the next storm, but having a better life, better quality of life.
Well, I think that may be possible in certain parts of the world. I think much of the world is likely to be uninhabitable given what's already sort of in runaway cascade mode. But having conversations like this with people who get it, who are not just collapse aware, but collapse accepting, and then like, okay, here's what's real. Now, what's possible? And then living out of that place of joy and contribution and compassion and generosity, you know, accepting what's real and then doing everything we can to participate with the natural regenerative processes of nature.
Yeah, I have relatives who live in cities and in suburbs, and yeah, I'm very concerned, very worried for them.
Yeah.
I try to, some I can have deep conversations with about societal collapse, and some I can't.
Of course.
But I try to interject. When someone says, "Oh, the fires in California, I'm so glad we aren't there," and then I turn and my friend who's living in Ontario said, "Well, where does all your fruit and vegetables come from?"
That's
80%
good.
from California.
Oh, that's
If
good.
California's in trouble, you're in trouble. So,
Yeah.
connecting the dots and helping
Yeah.
people recognize what sustains you, where do you
Yes.
get these basic necessities of life? And if you don't want to be so reliant on these places that might just say, I'm not exporting food anymore to Ontario, then, it's time to start to really build out the, food security networks in
Yeah.
where you live.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that I found so helpful about that piece that you wrote, uh, 7 or 8 months ago, was the practical land-based aspect and community-based aspect grounded in the land, that is so essential to any authentic community and any community that can possibly thrive or just even survive into the future. So. Well, Jessica, so how does somebody learn about you in terms of where do they go? Anybody watching this that wants to learn more or be in communication with you?
Okay, yeah, we have a Facebook page, Caapi Cottage Retreats on Facebook, and I'll when you write up this, I'll put my email addresses and contacts, Instagram, and all of that kind of stuff. And also, we are doing a series because we still do some video production. We started a series called Love in Action, which profiles people who are on the front lines of responding to, in a really generative way in community, to the crisis. So some of the people that I've had conversations with include Skeena Rathur of Extinction Rebellion, and Rainbow Eyes, who was one of the Fairy Creek Forest Defenders, who's now a deputy for the Green Party in Canada, deputy leader, and also Laura Schmidt, who
Yes, yes.
she's been on Postdoom from the Good Grief Network. So part of the thing is to talk about people who are really active and responding in ways that are helping, support reducing harm and living with more joy and saving what we can. Just
Yes.
like Connie is doing, we can, and it's not to say we know the answer, that it's going to actually work long term, but the process of engaging and doing is really the important part.
Absolutely. What I see my role as is helping people to have a big picture understanding such that clarity can replace confusion. So they go, with an ecological understanding of history, they can go, oh, of course, of course, of course. So they're not confused. And then that usually replaces or helps to replace the blame with compassion. They can have compassion for people that before all they could, judge and blame. And then where does love motivate them to be in action? Calm and courageous love in action. So I'm grateful that you're using that term as well, because I think that that's it. It's different. It's distinct from fearful, desperate activism, which a lot of good-hearted, brilliant, big-hearted people do, which is great. But and often the actions can be the same, but when it's motivated by love and action, where does love motivate you to be in action, to be a blessing to your community and the world, not without attachment to how this is going to ultimately turn out? Because as we all know, things are wigging out pretty seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things, the Deep Adaptation Network is sort of a place for people to land, and I think that that's going to be more and more important as things, as this collapse progresses and accelerates, is for people to have places they can talk about their difficult emotions and process them and, develop the skills really to work through these times, deep listening, deep relating. One of the things that concerns me the most is so many people just do not have communication skills, the ability to self-regulate, the ability to even know when they're, getting triggered and reacting in a way that's not helpful. So, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for a lot of this work to spread.
Yes, amen. Well, Jessica, this has absolutely been wonderful. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me, and blessings on your work, and both locally there on Dominica, but also in terms of the Deep Adaptation Forum. And I look forward to interacting with you again in the not too distant future.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's been a joy.
Blessings.